These are photos of some of the 11 alleged members or associates of the South Los Angeles-based Hoover Street Gang who are now in federal custody on a long list of charges.
They pride themselves on being everybody killers. EBK standing for that, everybody killers, to symbolize their lethality in our community.
I heard what the term EBK means, and it sounds kind of intense.
Everybody killer.
Everybody killer. Everybody killer for sure.
That's a lot of people. Everybody?
Everybody is everybody.
In the streets of South Los Angeles, everybody understands the long-standing war between the Crips and the Bloods. But there's one gang that puts more fear in Crip sets than any Blood ever could: the Hoover Criminals. They started off as Crips, then broke away and turned into something way more dangerous: an independent, cutthroat crew that lives by one rule: everybody killer.
Just took a blue rag, put it down, said our C don't mean Crip, it mean criminal. Our rag is orange, and now we ain't siding with the Bloods, we everybody killer.
They went after enemies, rivals, and even the people they once called allies. And instead of fading out, they grew tougher, colder, and nationwide. This is why the color orange strikes more fear in Crips than red ever did. Let's get into it. The Hoover story really starts back in the 1960s, long before the Crips became the defining force of Los Angeles gang culture. At the time, you had a loose neighborhood crew called the Hoover Groovers, just young dudes from around Hoover Street, holding down their blocks between Vermont Avenue and Figueroa Avenue. They were simply local kids protecting their area, building a reputation, and figuring out who they were in a city where street identity meant everything. The first major turning point came after a tragedy hit the set. One of the original Hoover Groovers lost his younger brother to a murder, and the word on the street was that the West Side Crips had something to do with it. That accusation immediately brought heavy tension. But instead of rushing into a full-on war, both sides agreed to meet face-to-face at the St. Andrews Recreation Center. That meeting changed everything. Once they talked it through, the Hoovers and the West Side Crips realized another crew, the Figueroa Boys, were the real suspects. What happened next sealed their alliance. Members of both sides pulled up on the leader of the Figueroa Boys at a nightclub and beat him down publicly. From that moment, their bond was official, and the Hoover Groovers became aligned with the West Side Crips. By the mid-1970s, they dropped the Groovers' identity completely and started calling themselves the Hoover Crips. Even as part of the larger Crip network, though, the Hoovers still carried a reputation for doing things their own way. They were aligned, but they were never followers. Everything shifted again around 1979 when the entire Crip landscape blew apart. A brutal feud erupted between two powerhouse sets, the Rollin 60 Neighborhood Crips and the 8 Tray Gangster Crips.
In 1979, along with Tookie's arrest, was the start of the Eight Tray Rollin 60s war. So I understand the whole thing was over a girl.
Yes, sir.
That war was so big and so destructive that every other Crip set in LA had to pick a side, and picking the wrong one could cost you your life. On one side were the Neighborhood Crips, often called the Deuce Gangs or 2X. On the other side were the Gangster Crips, known as Tray Gangs or 3X. The Hoovers made their choice and stood with the Gangster Crips, officially becoming the Hoover Gangster Crips. But the moment that truly reshaped everything wasn't about internal politics. It came in August 1979 when Raymond Washington, the man who created the Crips in the first place, was shot and killed. Raymond was only 26 years old when someone he knew walked up and blasted him with a sawed-off shotgun on 64th and San Pedro. His death sent shockwaves through the streets. Raymond was respected, feared, and seen as the original architect of the lifestyle. Losing him was like the foundation of the Crip world cracking. Even though nobody could prove exactly who pulled the trigger, rumors started flying immediately. Raymond came from the East Side Crips, and people from his side of town were quick to place blame on the Hoovers. It didn't matter that there was no hard evidence. The Hoovers already had a reputation for being one of the most feared and unpredictable Crip sets out there. So once the whispers started, the story spread fast. The Hoovers killed Raymond Washington. That rumor alone was enough to ignite one of the longest-running wars in Los Angeles gang history. The East Coast Crips and the Hoover Gangster Crips became locked into a feud that still hasn't fully died down more than 45 years later. By the time the 1980s hit, the streets of LA had completely changed. and the Hoovers were already positioned for what came next. Crack hit South Central like a meteor, and it didn't just introduce a new drug, it reshaped whole neighborhoods and turned certain gangs into full-blown criminal powerhouses. The Hoover Gangster Crips were ready for the moment. Coming off the chaos of the late 70s and their rising reputation, they used that momentum and their massive territory to lock down a big piece of the crack market.
No drug seems to be spreading faster on the streets of Los Angeles than rock. Some say it has become an epidemic because what was once the rich person's drug is now within reach of the middle class and perhaps even the poor.
Two subsets in particular became the engines of the operation: the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips and the 74 Hoover Criminals gang. These weren't just cliques hanging on corners. They became the money machines. Federal investigators later estimated that these two sets alone were making anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million a year off crack sales. The Hoovers had multiple drug houses running at once, each moving product with the kind of organization you'd expect from a legit company, except instead of customer service smiles, their business model leaned on intimidation and quick, often brutal violence to keep everything in line.
Related deaths have increased dramatically in the past year, along with dramatic increases in violence and crime, all attributed to crack.
Law enforcement knew exactly how serious things had gotten. In May 1989, the feds launched a massive raid called Operation Power Outage, targeting the 52 Hoovers. Hundreds of agents stormed suspected crack spots at dawn, trying to dismantle what had become a deeply rooted and highly efficient drug network. The scope of the raid alone showed how far the Hoovers had come from those early neighborhood days. Coming out of the crack-dominated 1980s, the Hoovers were already seen as one of the most feared groups on the streets. But the move they made in the mid-1990s took things to a whole different level. After nearly 20 years of riding under the Crip umbrella, the Hoovers decided they were done with the Crip identity altogether. It was a full-on declaration that flipped L.A. gang politics upside down. They dropped Crip from their name and rebranded themselves as the Hoover Criminals Gang. But the name change was only the surface. What really shook the streets was the new mindset they adopted: ABK, anybody killer, or EBK, everybody killer. They weren't looking for new allies or trying to balance old relationships. The Hoovers were saying, flat out, that they were independent, and anybody who stepped wrong, whether enemy, former ally, or random person caught in the mix, could get handled.
Just took a blue rag, put it down, said our C don't mean Crip, it mean criminal. Our rag is orange, and now we ain't siding with the Bloods. We everybody killer. We CK, we Crip killing and blood killing.
It was a radical shift, and you could see it everywhere. Their graffiti became a warning wall. Where most gangs tag up to show set pride or diss rivals, the Hoovers took it further, writing CK, Crip Killer, BK, Blood Killer, and even OK, Rollin Zero's Killer. They were telling the entire city, in big bold letters, that they weren't playing sides anymore. They were moving on their own laws, their own motives, their own timeline.
I heard what the term EBK means, and it sounds kind of intense.
Everybody killer.
Everybody killer. Everybody killer for sure.
That's a lot of people. Everybody?
Everybody's everybody.
But that independence came at a cost. Dropping the Crip identity immediately turned them into one of the most hated and targeted gangs in South Central. Sets they had once been aligned with suddenly became enemies. The list of rivals exploded. The East Coast Crips, the Rollin 60s, the Main Street Crips, the Rollin Hundreds, plus the majority of blood sets in the region. The Hoovers found themselves fighting on almost every side, surrounded by crews who considered them dangerous, unpredictable, and disloyal. Ironically, that isolation made them even more formidable. With no alliances to maintain and no political rules to follow, they had nothing to lose. Their ABK ideology turned them into one of the most aggressive and self-contained forces in Los Angeles. Every beef was personal now. Every conflict was approached with the same intensity. The only major exception within the Hoover umbrella was the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips. Their OGs refused to give up the Crip identity, choosing to stay true to the traditions they grew up under. Even today, you'll see members of the 50s twos blending the classic blue with Hoover orange, holding on to that older identity even as the rest of the Hoover sets forged their own path. By the time the Hoovers fully embraced their independence in the 1990s, The ripple effect across Los Angeles was massive. That shift made them one of the most dangerous forces in the city, and the impact became painfully clear in the years that followed, especially when it came to their relationships with sets they once coexisted with peacefully. One of the most shocking examples of this happened with the Main Street Mafia Crips, a set that had long shared space, history, and even celebrations with the Hoovers. For years, the Hoovers and the Main Streets lived side by side. They shared borders. Their members partied together. Hood Days, those annual celebrations where crews honor their neighborhoods, were often attended by both sides. It wasn't perfect harmony, but it was peace. That peace ended in August 2009, and once it broke, it shattered in a way that could never be repaired. It started at a party hosted by the Main Street Crips. A simple disagreement, reportedly over a female, got heated and spiraled into gunfire. People tried stepping in, trying to keep the situation from turning into something bigger, but the damage was already done. The next day, Hoover member Dequan Allen was dead, and this is where the story turns into one of the darkest chapters in the Hoover Main Street feud. Dequan, known as 4-Star or Touche, was only 13 years old. On August 16, 2009, he and his cousin were walking home from a swap meet, both dressed in Hoover colors, when they were approached by Christopher Thomas, a 21-year-old Main Street Mafia Crip. Thomas asked the question that every kid in gang territory fears. "Where you from?" Dequan answered honestly, 9-4 Hoover. That was it. Thomas pulled out a gun and shot the boy twice in the chest. Dequan collapsed and died. If there was any chance of peace left between the two gangs, that moment killed it. 3 days later, at a candlelight vigil held in Dequan's honor, a suspected Main Street member walked right up to the crowd and opened fire on the mourners. The Hoover response came fast, and it came with precision. 9 days after Dequan's murder, on August 25th, a Hoover gunman walked straight into Main Street territory. He walked right into the heart of their turf and opened fire at close range, killing 29-year-old Drayvon James and 16-year-old Robert Nelson. Police called the killings up close and personal, the kind of execution-style murders that showed careful planning and a willingness to take extreme risks. That wasn't the end of it. The violence exploded, and within just 72 hours, 10 people were shot, 3 killed. What had once been a stable relationship had devolved into an all-out war, one fueled by grief, revenge, and years of simmering tension. But the Hoover history of long, brutal conflicts didn't stop there. One of the most infamous demonstrations of the Hoovers' willingness to engage in prolonged, systematic violence came during their feud with the Rollin 100's Neighborhood Crips. This wasn't some new beef. This rivalry dated back decades, one of the original Crip-on-Crip wars. But by 2015, everything reached a breaking point. On July 17, 2015, respected Rollin 100 SOG Kenneth KP Peavy was ambushed and killed by 2 Hoover members. KP wasn't just anybody, he was a well-known figure, someone other gangs respected. His murder lit the fuse on a conflict that spilled far beyond LA's streets and onto social media.
A security camera was rolling at 12:45 in the morning on Friday, July 17, 2015, when a car rolled down the street with someone inside shooting at Kenneth Peavy.
Shortly after KP's death, a challenge started circulating online under the hashtag 100 Days, 100 Nights. The rumor was that the Rollin 100s were planning to kill 100 Hoover affiliates in 100 days. Whether the challenge was official or just internet fuel didn't matter, the streets believed it, and the violence that followed proved that people were acting on it. Day 1 set the tone. On July 20th, just 3 days after KP's murder, a Rollin 100's member drove to 81st, and Hoover pulled up alongside 47-year-old Anthony Alonzo Cudger and shot him dead in his car. That killing opened the floodgates. Over the next several months, South Central looked like a literal war zone. Shootings happened day after day. Innocent people were caught in crossfire. Families avoided leaving their homes. Police patrols doubled, then tripled, but the violence kept coming. By the end of that period and the years that followed, over 60 people were killed along the Hoover corridor alone. The streets had seen gang wars before, but nothing as public, sustained, and relentless as this. This era cemented a harsh truth. When the Hoovers go to war, they commit to full-scale campaigns. After years of non-stop wars in Los Angeles, one thing became clear to anyone paying attention. The Hoover criminals weren't just a local problem anymore. By the late 80s and into the 90s, their reputation had grown so large and their violence so consistent that the threat of the Hoovers started to stretch far beyond South Central, and that's one of the main reasons traditional Crip sets fear them more deeply than almost any other enemy. With most gangs, leaving LA means putting distance between yourself and the conflict. But with the Hoovers, even relocation doesn't guarantee safety. Their influence followed people across the country, and in many cities, they built new empires of their own. One of the strongest examples of that expansion is what happened in Seattle during the height of the crack era. When LA was exploding with drug activity, gang members started moving product to fresh markets in other states. Around 1985 to 1986, a well-known Hoover figure, George Edward O.G. Peanut Hendricks, moved north and laid the foundation for the 74 Hoover Criminals gang in Seattle. What he built there was no small operation. By the time O.G. Peanut was killed in 2012, shot in a fight with a blood member over a woman, he had turned the Seattle Hoovers into the biggest gang in the region, with an estimated 200 active members. They controlled the Rainier Valley, ran heavy drug operations, and quickly earned the same kind of feared reputation their LA home base was known for.
Gang competition for drug millions has led two LA gangs, the Crips and the Bloods, to expand to the northwest, battling for turf in Seattle and Portland. Seattle police say that 7 people have been killed there this year in drug gang-related shootings.
Portland, though, might be the clearest example of how far the Hoover name can spread. The city became home to what law enforcement called the most active LA gang offshoot outside of California. Multiple Hoover sets took root there, the 107s, the 74s, and the 102s. And they wasted no time bringing LA politics with them. Since 2002, Portland has seen a long-running war between the Hoovers and the Rollin 60 Neighborhood Crips, echoing the same kind of beef that shaped entire decades in South Central. Things got so bad that in 2019, federal prosecutors indicted several Hoover members in Portland for crimes linked to 3 murders. One case came out of something as wild as an illegal dogfight that turned into a shootout. A 74 Hoover member gunned down a Rollin 60s affiliate, and the retaliation killed the Hoover member's fiancée.
The Hoovers, born in Los Angeles, have ties throughout the West Coast, some members calling Portland home since the 80s. 3 of those gang members are now facing federal racketeering and murder charges.
They pride themselves on being everybody killers.
Their reach didn't stop on the West Coast. The Hoovers pushed all the way across the country, embedding themselves on the East Coast as well. In Maryland, the 59 Hoover criminal gang formed a presence in Columbia, Howard County. Authorities first noticed signs of them back in 2011 after finding Hoover tags and materials inside the Howard County Detention Center. What followed was a massive investigation that took over a decade to fully crack open. In 2021, the leader of the 59 Hoovers, Jeremy Quentin Lewis, just 36 years old, was convicted of the first-degree murder of 21-year-old Jaden Ely. He got life without parole, plus another 100 years. 7 of his associates also pled guilty to different charges including robbery, gang activity, and assault, with sentences reaching up to 18 years. By the time the dust settled, it was clear the Hoover presence on the East Coast were deeply embedded and operating like a real criminal network. When you break down all these expansions, the politics behind the fear become obvious. Traditional Crips don't look at the Hoovers the same way they look at the Bloods or even long-standing rivals. The Hoover criminals pose a different kind of threat, one built on unpredictability, expansion, and the ABK mindset that doesn't follow normal gang logic. That's what makes them so feared. There's no system to negotiate with, no alliance to lean on, no universal rules to rely on, and their independence only made them more dangerous. When they dropped the Crip identity, they gave up all political backing within the Crip nation. They isolated themselves intentionally, and that isolation means they move differently.